Well, hello there, I'm Détroit. I participated in my first art contest recently. I have no idea why I never thought about art contests previously in my life. I mean, can you believe it? I've been drawing for years, and only now have I thought about this obvious way to both gain traction and potential prizes. I'm so bad at this influencer thing. Anyhow, I participated in an art contest with the drawing you're currently seeing me make. Before we get into the drawing proper and I explain every step of the way, let's talk about the contest. There are chapters in the bar below, by the way, if you want to skip to a particular topic. The contest I participated in is called Art and Risk. It's a French contest for French people, and I believe this year is only its second edition. The goal of the contest is to bring attention to risks in general and risk management. For this, the contest is split in two parts. The part about natural and environmental risks, such as flooding, storms, droughts, etc. And the part about technological risks, like nuclear, industrial, chemical, and so on. And for each of these two topics, the art contest is split depending on what type of arts you are doing. For example, digital arts for me. I think the idea of the contest is cool, because it both serves a purpose and offers a nice pool of prizes. Yes, because obviously there are prizes involved. I figured, hey, that's a way I can try to get a couple bucks by drawing, since I'm unemployed and kinda poor at the moment. For each category, the prize is 250 euros, an emergency safety kit, and a device linked to your art type, like a digital tablet for example. Oh, and I should mention, the contest was running from June until September 15th, so the applications are already over and the results should come out mid-October. I'll let you know more then. Now that you understand the context, let's talk about what I chose for my theme. To be honest, before I started this project, I wanted to draw a lot of tubes and something floating inside a vat of liquid. I thought maybe I can make it about the risks that artificial intelligence is posing and so on. But then I realized that AI was not one of the risk categories allowed in the contest. And so I chose the theme that would correlate most with my idea and adapted it to nuclear risks. To be absolutely clear, I have nothing against nuclear energy and nuclear power plants. Nuclear energy is good, efficient, and I believe it to be the best alternative to fossil fuel that we have. Understand that I am saying this as a scientist that kinda gets this domain, although it isn't exactly what I do. I know nuclear technology isn't perfect, but it's much better than the public opinion sometimes leads us to think. I wanted to make that clear because my drawing is about nuclear risks, but I am all for nuclear. This is why I turned the drawing more into a dystopian view of a potential future instead of focusing on actual risks. My drawing is named Nuclear Baby, for a lack of a better title to be honest. It represents a future in which humanity and technology become indissociable. You can see human figures floating in tanks in the middle of what looks like nuclear power plant chimneys arranged in a never-ending grid. Now, are the humans being fed nuclear energy? Or are they producing the nuclear energy? There are no humans around the nuclear babies in the control room, so who is controlling who here? That's what I mean by indissociable between humanity and technology. With this very Matrix-like dystopic future, it's hard to know, and you can see this at the statement about our need for energy and our ever-increasing energy consumption. But ecology as a whole is a topic I'm very passionate about, and now is not the time to go into a full rant about it. You get the theme of the drawing though. And to get the theme across, I am consciously using a lot of different elements which I will now detail, because unlike a lot of my other drawings, nothing here is left to chance. First off, let's talk about the composition. Nothing evokes uneasiness like a slanted perspective grid. The chimneys are not perfectly straight, and you're not looking directly at a row of the grid, but at an angle. This is to emphasize the idea of a dystopian future. The fact that you can see all the chimneys all around shows that the point of view is like any other point, and that this grid of nuclear chimneys is much bigger than what is shown. This is also shown with numbers on the chimney walls that are in the hundreds, so you know there are at least that many different chimneys hosting nuclear babies. So far we have the dystopy and a sense of scale. The nuclear aspect should be pretty evident from the shape and color of the chimneys, and the radioactive symbols on the heavy doors. Now, let's show that we're in the future. Honestly, this is very cheap, but it works. Everybody knows that the future is shown with floating, transparent, glowing hologram screens. Since every one of these chimneys is a small-scale research lab, or control room for a given nuclear baby, let's coat the inner walls of the chimneys with these clear blue hologram screens. Next is the power plant and technological aspect. To make something look complicated, have tubes everywhere. Some tubes transport the fluid that fills the vats with the babies, and some tubes are full of power cables, but you don't need to know which. The goal is to fill the space, and especially the floor, with these tubes to show the complex machinery that is this nuclear grid as a whole. Next, I won't delve deep into the details such as the doors or the paper posters on the inner walls, because they exist to fill the space and just make it interesting. As you can see, every element of this digital drawing is thought of and planned to give the vibe I wanted. Even for the colors, which I'll talk about later. I think the style I chose fits perfectly this overall aesthetic, which is exactly why I chose this style. I don't know if it has a name, maybe technological surrealism would sound cool? Anyway, I called this the Thibaut Soray style, since this is the artist I'm heavily getting inspired by here. Look at these references from this artist. And by the way, you can find their website in the description, it's worth a look. There are a couple elements in all these pictures that really made me want to try this style, and this project was the perfect excuse. First off, the sense of scale. Grand things with no explanations. It's very mystic, but industrial at the same time. Second thing, the color palettes are very nice. Third thing, it's both very detailed and very minimalistic. You can see large planes with no details whatsoever next to very detailed areas of interest. The blend between the two is made with a design element that is so good I had to use it myself, which is the random shaped stains. The small squiggles that look like islands. Every surface is made grungy by adding these weird shapes like rusted areas or spilt liquid that never fully dried. These fill the space very nicely, but without removing the minimalistic aspect of large boring areas. It is through wanting to emulate this artist, Thibaut Soray, that I chose to draw a very detailed line art with a very thin and clean brush. In fact, the brush I'm using is a basic round circle in Procreate, with no change in size or opacity. The details of the stain and later the shadow lines are the only thing with the different size brush, the smallest I could, which is basically a single pixel. For cleanliness purposes, I have softened the strokes so that tiny hand movements will be ignored. In fact, using a brush like this is the reason I'm using Procreate for the line art instead of Photoshop. The smoothing on the Photoshop brushes is really bad in my opinion. The other reasons for using Procreate are the perspective grid you can easily turn on and off, the fact that I can move around a lot faster using my fingers, and finally because drawing a perfect ellipse at the perfect size and angle is made much easier with Procreate. For the coloring though, since I will be using a lot of gradients, I have chosen to turn to Photoshop, since Procreate still lacks the simple gradient tool that any other program has. In any case, no matter the program, I have to say that I ran into a lot of different issues during this drawing process. Some I could have resolved with more attention or patience. Some I could not have changed. I'm talking perspective, for example. Drawing cylinders on a grid is feasible, especially since I'm already using a perspective grid. By hand, it's a bit hard to do properly as circles become ellipses when on a 3D plane, but I eyeballed it and it was fine. Aligning the top and bottom of the cylinders is also kinda okay with eyeballing, although I had to resort to using 2-point perspective instead of 3-point in the end, or a mix between the two. You can't really see the difference, but with the perspective grid I was using, the vertical axis would not have been as straight as it is in the drawing. I basically cheated and assumed that all vertical lines would be parallel to the side of the canvas, mainly to make it easier for myself. All of this cheating, just to make cylinders. Now, imagine turning these cylinders into nuclear chimneys with curving outer walls. This is simply too hard to draw by hand. Because that's the thing, I did everything by hand, even though this is a study of Thibaut Sorei's art, which is done with 3D models painted on. I had a chat with the artist and they confirmed that it is indeed 3D. This explains how the perspective can remain perfect even when complicated organic shapes are taken into account. Something, for example, that you don't really see from afar when you look at my drawing is the fuzziness of certain lines. In order to draw perfectly good ellipses and have all of them fit the same grid, I drew one and then duplicated it and moved it around, and then deformed the perspective to fit the grid. But Procreate, like Photoshop, is a pixel-based drawing software, not a vector-based one, which means that a line has a thickness, and that thickness also gets deformed with perspective. All of it to say that I wish I knew how to use a software like Blender sometimes, to make my sketches better and build complex things with the perfect perspective. I'm gonna tell you a secret, just for you, no one else. I am in the process of learning Blender. Slowly, but I'm getting there, and soon I'll be able to build 3D sketches for my most complex drawing ideas, such as this one. But also, because I am using a completely different process, this is why I felt okay with trying to replicate Thibaut Sorei's style as close as I can. The idea of the drawing is all mine, but the style is so specifically all theirs, and I would not have attempted to copy it using the same tools. There is a line between inspiration and plagiarism, and I think using the same tools to make the same style of illustration with the same kind of vibe is a bit too much for me. So yeah, for the future I will try to add 3D models as part of my tool belt for drawing and illustrating. Back to the present, as now I'll talk a bit about the coloring process for this cool illustration. I started by duplicating all inking layers except the ones for the details, and merging everything into one, so that I could use this layer as a reference for coloring. With Procreate, you can set a layer as reference, and then when you drag and drop colors onto a new layer, the colors will fill depending on the reference. This is much more efficient, but similar to in Photoshop when you use the wand tool to select areas on one layer, and then go to another layer to use the bucket tool. To make a flat coloring, Procreate is really good, and I used it to pick a basic hue for each grouping of areas, like the outer chimneys, or the desks, or the doors. Unfortunately, I knew I wanted to add gradients of colors everywhere, and that is when I decided to switch to Photoshop on PC instead of staying in Procreate. As I said before, Procreate doesn't make gradients easy, whereas Photoshop does. In the later versions of Photoshop, such as the one I'm using, you can even tweak a gradient after applying it, like moving the points around or changing the color of the points individually. This is very important in the iterative process of determining what looks best. And what I determined to look the best as a color palette is this warm yellowish gray, contrasted with the cold grayish blue. Again, this is a dystopic future. It's not a happy thing, and the colors have to reflect that. Both the warm and cool parts are also emphasized by the vats with the babies in orange, which is warm, and the screens in blue, which is cool. Every area also has a bit of a gradient to it, basically going from a bit light and desaturated in the bottom right, and a bit darker and saturated in the top left. Finally, to add dimension and help sell the scene without it all being a bit too flat, I decided to have a warm source of light coming from the side. In my headcanon, this is important because it shows that this scene takes place outside, and the light comes from the setting sun. This could have been the inside of a hangar with a harsh white light, but no, this is the outside world in this dystopian future, which I believe is incredibly more concerning if the outside world looks like this. At this step of the process, you can also see, if you pay special attention, that I cheated a bit with the angles of the shadows because, again, my perspective isn't perfect and the chimneys are not all the proper height. Oh, and for an easy tip with shining light, this lighting I added is just a bright orange flat on a screen layer style. You can note that to add to the visual coherence of the style, I traced the path of the light using 1 pixel thick curves. It adds just a tiny bit of visual noise and helps anchor the difference between light and shadow, which kinda looks weird without the separation. All the line art is always fully in black, with the exception of what is seen through a screen or a vat. The very thin lines that are the stains and the shadow delimitation are also black, but because they are just 1 pixel wide, you register them more as texture than the rest of the line art that is a bit thicker. And finally, in the coloring phase, I slightly shifted the hue in some of the biggest island-shaped stains. Again, just a bit of visual noise. And with all of that said, I think this is about it for the process, I believe. And now has come the time to reveal, well, the time. According to Procreate, I had this file open for a total of 9 hours and 9 minutes for the whole of the sketching and inking phase. Bonus information, this corresponded to a total number of strokes of 8,163, which I thought would be a lot more, to be honest. As for the coloring made in Photoshop, I didn't film it all. I sometimes worked on it off camera, and I also streamed an hour or so on it on Twitch, for a total of approximately 3 hours. And so, in total, I estimate this drawing to have taken me 12 hours over 3 days. I really love it. I'm also glad I made it in 4000 x 3000 pixel format, since you can really get the details in there, like the thin lines, while it's still being manageable and not too big. This drawing is a success for me on all accounts. I think it looks cool, it was a good study of a talented artist that I like, it has a lot of meaning, hidden or not, and it was made in the context of an art contest and not simply a random idea in my head. This is a style I will revisit in the future, although maybe not with something so mechanical and with perspective. I want to try maybe organic shapes and wacky nonsense with the very thin lines and muted colors. Or maybe even a character design would be cool in the style. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into this project. It's a bit of a longer video, but the drawing took a lot longer to make than my usual stuff as well. Since the contest is over, I won't ask you to go to Instagram to like specifically this drawing, but you can still head there and have a look at all my stuff. And I am also on most social media, usually with the handle Detroit. You can support me by either subscribing to this channel for free or directly sending a couple bucks over on ko-fi.com/Detroit. I don't know what or when the next video will be, but I can't wait to show you more art next time. Bye!